Welcome back to Long Delay's Hobbies. It's been a while. Today I decided I was going to paint up a Khandish Warrior to get my legacy armies in tip-top shape. I decided to go with a blue color scheme for my guys. So I'm going to start with painting his outside cloth or jacket with the fang because I wanted a somewhat bright but not too bright blue uh, for for this color scheme. There's quite a few different pieces and bits and bobs to this model. So the Fang is going to cover the majority of the model, but there are going to be a lot of different colors that I use. And the next one's going to be Mornfang Brown Air for his boots. I did use an air paint because, as I've said in the past, I am quite lazy, and if I can avoid putting a paint on my wet palette and just paint it straight for the pot, then that's what I'm going to do. And for his quiver, I used Wordbearer's Red. I could have just used Mornfang Brown here, but I wanted him to have a slightly different color for his quiver. The quiver's not very big. The only, I guess, tricky part about it is making sure you get the entire quiver because it's actually got quite a few angles. For his skin, I used Bugman's Glow. Just the basic skin color for a normal human, especially for a human who's supposed to be from the southern parts of Middle Earth and is going to have a slightly darker skin tone. And for his cloth helmet, or leathery helmet, I used Doombull Brown. I also used Doombull Brown on his leather armor slash shirt that is underneath his outer robes. Doombull Brown is a layer paint, so I did have to apply multiple coats. This process did take, of applying Doombull Brown took a bit longer than I would have thought, but that is because Doombull Brown is a rather thin paint. For his bow, I used Steel Legion Drab. I wanted the bow to stand out a little bit. I could have used a darker tone, a darker color here, like Dryad Bark or something, but I wanted the bow to really stand out on the tabletop. So I used the lighter Steel Legion Drab here. He also has a piece of wood, or at least I assume it was wood, that attaches his back banner. I used Steel Legion Drab on that. For the actual back banner itself, I used Cantor Blue. I decided to go with a slightly different blue than the one that his robes are in. Again, I wanted to just differentiate the flag from his robes. Again, if I were trying to do this as fast as possible, I probably would have just used the Fang. I just wanted a slightly different color. And my recipe for painting white cloth and white robes and so forth is to use is to start with Rackar Flesh. It does, when I lay down the base coat, it does look a little bit odd because it is more of a cream color. But I'm going to apply some washes and highlights that I hope will make it look a little bit better. For his mustache, I used Abaddon Black, and it is an air paint. And due to the nature of this sculpt, the mustache and facial hair are not that very well distinguished from the face, so you just get a brush with a nice point on it and just kind of go slow for this part. There's not a lot of metal on this model, but I used iron hand steel to paint the metal that there is. The metal that you would need to paint for the archer is the little bits of metal protruding from the back of his helmet, as well as the very top of the back banner. Of course, there are axe-wielding Khandish Warriors. You would use this to paint the axes as well. I used dryad bark to paint the bows in his quiver. This is what I mean when I say that there were a lot, for being such a small model, there are a lot of different colors that go into play. And for the fletching on the bows, on the arrows rather, I used gray cere. And last but not least, we're going to use Retributor Armor for those nice bits of gold trim. So the gold trim is on the helmet. I feel like that you could probably skip this if you really wanted to, but I really like the way the gold trim kind of just brings out the rest of the helmet. There are some gold buttons as well on his little armor. He's also got like a little sun on his quiver that I painted with Retributor Armor. So we're gonna, now that he's all base coated, we're gonna use some Drakenhof Nightshade. I used quite a bit of wash in the brush here to make sure I got all into the recesses when I was painting with Drakenhof Nightshade on the outer robes as well as on the back banner itself. This model does have quite a few recesses, which is really nice. It means that when you do load up that brush with washes, it takes really well. You can really bring out the different contrasts in the model. For the brown and leathery bits, we're going to use some Agrex Earthshade. So we're going to start with the boots, and then move on to the bow and his helmet. So there are quite a few little brown and leathery bits all over the model. There's his quiver, his bow. Don't forget his little piece of leathery armor. The little arrows in the quiver itself. The little piece of wood that connects the back banner. So there's actually quite a few places to wash. With Nuln Oil, the only thing I washed was the little bit of metal at the top of the back banner. Then I moved on to some Reikland Flesh Shade, which I used to wash up the skin. Again, I loaded up the brush quite a bit because I really wanted to bring out the recesses in the skin. And for that white cloth, I used Sepia Shade from Vallejo Game Color. This is going to, again, bring out those different recesses in that belt. Give it a bit more of a natural look. And finally, to wash up the fletching on the arrows, I used Apothecary White, which is like essentially like a gray wash, but it will bring out the different details in the fletchings itself. I had to apply this a couple of times to make sure that those details actually came out, because it is quite subtle. And now that the washes are done, I started my highlighting with rust gray. So this model does have quite a few edges. It takes really well to highlighting, especially the outer robe. So I just went through and found all those different folds and edges of the miniature, and started my highlighting process there. And I used some Scrag Brown to highlight the boots. Now, the boots, unlike the robe, do not have really great points that you can highlight. There's a couple folds, but I really just went through and just picked out some points that I think the light might naturally catch on with Scrag Brown. And I used some Tuscarora fur to highlight the edges of his leather armor that sits underneath his robes. I also used it to highlight the leather helmet that he's wearing on his head. So to highlight his leather armor, of course, want to go kind of slow here to make sure you don't mess up his robes or the armor itself. And I used a little lines of Eshin Gray over his mustache and beard. Um, this kind of, first of all, gives out some more depth to his mustache, so it's not just, blobs of flat black. And also maybe gives him a little bit more of a weathered look, like he's been around for a while, like a kind of salt and pepper. I applied a highlight of Record Flesh over the belt, the cloth belt that he's wearing. So after washing it with the sepia shade, I just brought the cream back out. Again, this kind of, I feel, makes it a little bit more of a natural belt looking, as if it's kind of been out in the world for a minute. And now I'm going to apply an extreme highlight of Fenrisian Gray back over those blue folds and edges in the robe. I'm just picking out some of the more prominent features. I'm not highlighting every single part where the rust gray is, just a few of the higher points and edges. And I'm gonna highlight the quiver with some Wazdecker red. While I was painting, I noticed that quite a bit of light was hitting the quiver, and I decided to just give that a little highlight with some Wazdecker red. And to highlight the skin, I used Cadian Flesh Tone. I am just hitting up the knuckles, fingers, nose, cheekbones. Still trying to make sure that I keep that washed down Bugman's glow there, though. And last but not least, we're going to use some Baneblade Brown Air Paint to give a little highlight to the bow on the top where the air, or where the light is going to hit. And with those highlights applied, he is ready to hit the table. And we've also given him some desert theme bases since he's coming from the south. Well, thank you very much for watching, and happy hobby.